So, just to recap, Seven Stones Indonesia opened their doors first, 2016.
Correct.
And originally starting as a real estate property service, you've now included a bit more of other services as well.
Well, a further bit of background to that, the whole idea of that really came about with an initiative from Terry about a year or so ago, where he got into his head this idea of investment roadmaps. And we started to write about that and write blogs about that, and it started to be the sort of the driver when people were coming in to talk to us about buying property. It was the idea of investment roadmaps. What are you going to do with it? Why are you doing it? What do you hope to achieve at the end of it? So the idea was that the property aspect, that you're buying something, land or a villa or a hotel or something at the end of the day, that was kind of at the end of the journey, not the end of the journey, but further down the journey. There were aspects to it that were usually ignored before you got to that. In a traditional real estate agency, they would be ignored because the idea would be to close the deal, get your commissions, and wham bam, thank you ma'am type of thing. Whereas Terry's idea was very much more interested in looking at it in terms of a roadmap. We start here to achieve this, which leads to that, which brings us this, which eventually gets to investing in this particular property or this particular business or that sort of thing.
Right.
And that kind of grew, that whole idea grew, because it turns out that a major part of that was to do with legal advice. You know?
And that's why you've incorporated legal services and as well as business and marketing.
Yeah, I think I can actually remember way back in our first office, we had the whole office was full of whiteboards, and we were actually going to conquer the world, but we have to adjust the target a little bit. And yeah, we did start talking about roadmaps, which made a lot of sense because we see a lot of cases where people buy a piece of land or a villa and they want to put it out on Airbnb and maximize the returns and rent it out short term, just to find out that it's in a green belt or it's in a residential area, which then complicates the permits, and it just becomes a painful experience. And a big part of that is legal advice, which I don't really know why, but in Bali it's been very common to kind of take a lot of shortcuts and not look into regulations and kind of put them under the table and get rid of them, and that set people up for issues later on. And our plan was always, a long-term business plan, a long-term business relationship with client. And we had a lot of talks about the obvious conflict of interest of selling people real estate and doing legal advice, which we're very aware of and make people aware of too. But sorry, but I think the aspect of people being exposed to think through that process is also another aspect, not just the legality of it. They understand that this is something they want to do a business with, or something they want to retire in, or a business first and then retire in, or they're just in for the investment and at some stage might want to sell out. How do you do that to minimize, tax exposure and impact, and so on and so on. So it was just difficult for us to find legal advisors that would spend the time we felt was needed with the clients to do that. So in the end, we started doing it ourselves. And I think in some way we had been doing it for a long time as part of the real estate, but we didn't think of having it as a business stream or a service. It was just kind of something we did. But once we crystallized into that and took it off, it started working really well. And then I guess the next thing now is the marketing and branding.
Yeah, I mean certainly the marketing and the branding side to it is kind of the last part of that puzzle, if you like. For example, we've gone through the reasons why somebody wants to set up a business and where they want to do it and what they need to do it, and we're now also in the position to be able to say, well, okay, you want a restaurant, you want a hotel, you want this kind of business. We're able to kind of do these marketing and branding maps too, so that we can take you from thinking of a good name, an effective logo, to looking at your market segments, to looking at how you would socialize your message within your team, and then delivering that to your target audiences and your target market. So it's almost like we've got packages of different things within each department. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes on in the legal thing, there's a bunch of stuff actually that goes on in the real estate thing, and there's a bunch of stuff that goes on in the marketing. You could actually take just one bit of that from any one of those three divisions and we'll do something for you. Or you could take a little bit of one, mix with a little bit of another, mix with a little bit of another thing. So it'd be a much bigger, I hate to use the phrase one stop, because we know people in the past that you've used that one stop shop idea, and it's been just a front for doing more dodgy stuff. And we don't want it to be that way. We want it to be a place where people can rely on us to kind of hold their hand and walk them through a process and listen to what they want to say and develop something that's both suitable to them and suitable to a target audience.
Great.
I think I think the business aspect of this too, when you see, in particular for expats, but also quite often Indonesians, when they come into Bali, they start looking for, let's say, a piece of land, and very often that's a painful experience. It's a green belt, it's a residential zone. The agent don't really know the owner, but he heard from someone who heard from someone who heard from someone. Then you get into construction, and that can also be a very painful experience. You need to be on it, you need to be focused. And eventually then you get into maybe a management company, and some of them are really good, some of them are not so good, and some of them are tearing you apart and ripping you off. So it makes sense to try to consolidate those aspects to have a much more efficient business module for people. And I think we talk a lot about branding and the value of branding. I think now with COVID-19 being ongoing and all businesses more or less down and out, that aspect is going to be tremendously important when we come back out of this, where there is going to be customers and tourism is going to return and guests are going to come back to Bali, but you really, really have to stand out in a proper way.
Well, the whole world's changed, right, because of that. So what may have worked for you pre-COVID-19 might not be the same formula for success afterwards.
Yeah, and I think the general sort of...
which we'll get into for the next episode.
We jumped in there.
Yeah. Okay, so that was a lot of very great information, and just to summarize for the audience in case anyone got a little lost, the delivery of your brand, basically, I can come in as a customer and have everything sorted out for me. If I was, say, wanting to make a restaurant business and I had my ideas, you guys would handle the legal aspect, the property aspect of it, and then eventually also market it to the right audience and all that.
I think that's correct, and I think that we spend quite some time with clients without necessarily charging anything to make them aware and to also make us understand what they want to achieve. And then they have the opportunity, there's no strings attached. They can use other real estate agents, they can use other legal advisors, or they can use other branding companies, but that gives us what we call, again, a roadmap that we can take the client through and make sure we perform the best way possible for them.